we come to item number 9 on our agenda, the Independent Māori Statutory Board proposed funding agreement for the 2022-23 financial year. So the purpose is to approve the funding agreement and to, I'll just ask for a mover and seconder. Maybe Al Filipaina and Angela Dalton would like to move and second this, and invite James Stevens and Alistair Cameron, if he may be online, just to talk to the paper, please. James.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Auckland Council makes a funding agreement with the Independent Māori Statutory Board each year, and this meets the legislative requirement that we fund their reasonable costs. This year, the proposed funding is similar to the previous funding agreements in dating back to 2019. It's about 3.025 million, and this funding covers the costs of the board members and their secretariat. This report also recommends a delegation to the Chief Executive that he is able to negotiate variations to this funding agreement up to $50,000, and this just removes the need to take the full agreement back to governing body if there's a small variation requested. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, James. The sum is just slightly over $3 million and slightly under what the IMSB has received in the last 2 years. And of course, funding the Independent Māori Statutory Board is a statutory obligation on us under the Local Government Act that established the new Auckland Council. So we'll go first to questions, and I have a question in the name of Councillor John Watson. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, James, for your report, a very succinct and clearly articulated one. I do have some questions, however, in respect of point number 6 in the executive salary. I'm not sure if you've got this information, but it says in point 6, an independent review of remuneration for the IMSB members has been completed and has recommended that remuneration should remain at the current proportion of 70% of councillor remuneration. So I'm taking that to mean that that's the councillor remuneration at the lowest level in our salary rate, which is 113,000 basically. Is that correct?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, that's correct. It's yep, those are the calculations.
Okay, so that, just on the basis of that then, so that amounts to a salary of nearly $80,000, 79,100. In terms of that review that was completed, independent review, I'm curious to know what the proportionality is to then local board remuneration, and I say that because that on the same salary rates we see that most local board members, no matter where they are roughly around 45,000 band, and this remuneration is near enough double that. So in this review, is there any proportionality between the various components of the governance structure at Auckland Council? And we've got the councillors, but in respect of board members, is there any comparison being made to them in terms of assessing this figure that this independent review has apparently come up with?
I'll direct that question to Phil Wilson, who's here today in place of our Chief Executive, Jim Stabak. Phil.
Through your worship, what the independent company that looks at this strategic pay, they look at a range of things, the duties of members of the IMSB, the makeup of their work. They express it as a percentage of councillors, but they look more broadly at relativity with a number of governance roles. It's fair to say I don't understand that they look specifically at relativity with local board roles.
Okay, so just in terms of arriving at that figure, and you mentioned a number of activities that board members are involved in. Are those activities articulated anywhere so that anyone reading this report might get some sense of how that workload might be different from, say, a board member?
There are aspects of the role set out in the legislation itself. They go to the role itself of the IMSB, therefore the role of the members of the IMSB. There is some material that we supply to the company that does the independent evaluation. I would have to review that to determine what was appropriate for the public arena or not, although I imagine the core of it would be fine for public consumption.
Well, you would hope so, given that it's public money that's funding that. I'll reserve the right to speak on this one, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question, Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. So I've got a couple of questions, and I mean the data or the detail may be there, but just can't find it. So in the report, and I'm looking at page 9 under the funding, it mentions additional project work, and it says the FY22 budget, including an additional 150,000 for 2 extraordinary projects. And I'd just like to know what those extraordinary projects are. Thanks. That's one question.
Thank you. And through the chair, Wayne, sorry, Councillor Walker, could you clarify which point you're talking about? Is it point 23? Sorry. No,
I'm looking at the draft of the funding agreement for FY23, and I'm looking at the end of that agreement where it specifically mentions the 150,000 for the additional project work, but it doesn't mention what the projects are.
Thank you. And through the chair, these were 2 projects which were carried out in the previous financial year. They're not carried through to the coming financial year. I don't recall off the top of my head what those projects were.
Okay, well, if it's possible to receive the information on that later, that'd be great. The other question I've got just goes to the funding, and I'm just tracking it back, and that's around the board remuneration and expenses, and then you've got the secretariat. Does one of those numbers, and I'm assuming it's more likely to be the secretariat, cover the cost of accommodation? So that's a question.
James, have you got information to answer the councillor on that, or is that something that you'll have to get back to him on?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, yes, I will have to get back to you on that. I'm not clear what is covered in expenses. I'm not aware of travel, but I would need to find out and come back to you.
So I'm not referring to travel. I'm referring to the office expenses of the IMSB. And if I can just go a step further by way of my questioning, and that is that I would anticipate that the cost of the offices is probably fairly substantial. I make the observation that if I look at our own council offices, the building's probably I don't know whether it's half empty or 3/4 empty or the like. We have a substantial number of people that are no longer working at the council offices, they're working remotely. The assumption I'm making is that we've got adequate capacity, and given the very close relationship between the IMSB and the council, and in particular the support that's noted around that, has there been a consideration of offering the IMSB office space within Albert Street, because there could be a significant saving there? And obviously that saving would come through to council, because we're already covering the cost of it.
Phil Wilson, please.
Through your worship. Look, that suggestion is well made. Obviously, our accommodation needs, our footprint has changed markedly in the last 18 months, and therefore that may well be right that there are opportunities other than the existed leased accommodation. The terms of that lease I'm not familiar with, but I would be happy to take that matter up with the Secretariat and with our property department for discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. And if that could happen with some urgency, because obviously our council is financially stressed, and I'm sure Desley is looking to make savings, value for money, wherever she can. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Greg Sayers, last question. Oh, no, not last question. Second to last question.
Thank you, Worship. I'm going to just pick up on questions from Councillor Watson. They may be best directed to Mr. Wilson, but it's very important that the members are remunerated fairly. So, I couldn't find in the report, obviously, if it's being linked to the councillor role at 70%, are those roles full-time, Phil, or part-time? You know how a councillor role is full-time. Is ISMB members, are they part-time, or are they also full-time roles?
Through the Mayor, I understand that the members, the ordinary IMSB member roles are evaluated as being part-time, but significantly so, a significant proportion of any given week on IMSB business. The chair is in a different situation and remunerated as a full-time role.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Phil. So normally those terms like strategic that you mentioned that carried out these exercises, I understand perhaps the remuneration authority does it the same way, they would job size a role. So they'd look at all the responsibilities, accountabilities, decision-making aspects of a role, not of the person, but of the role, and then size that to a certain number of whatever model that they use, and then they compare that against the market. So I don't know what our market is. There's one called public sector market, and they see where that intersects at the medium point or the upper quartile, or wherever their policy may rest. So I would have thought that I don't know if we can get some transparency around that, as if that firm did size the job and what markets they compare it to, I think it could be useful, because maybe tying it to a percentage, a 70% of a full-time council's role, I haven't got the comparison between the two methodologies. So is there a way that we could get some information back from that firm about why they chose to benchmark it as a 70% rather than job sizing it? And also related to that, the 70%, it says a continuation of it, because that's how it had been done in the past. Was that set up as a recommendation by a similar type of firm in the past, or was that just set up at the start of the supercity by the transition agency? How did that 70% originate? Do you know?
Yes, I can answer that question. So the same firm that conducted this assessment has done it previously, in fact, for a number of terms, and coincidentally, it's the same firm that council uses to benchmark salaries across employed positions. They do have access to and take account of the Remuneration Authority assessments of job size. So I can confirm it's a pretty well-informed view that they reach. The fact that they have to do this is set out as a requirement in the legislation. So there isn't a lot of discretion here, but of course we do ensure that it's done in a robust, objective manner.
Thanks, Phil. Just, Your Worship, I guess just as a supplementary to that, if you're able to come back to us either directly or indirectly, perhaps so it's quite clear about that robustness that you've just talked about, because I'd hate the role to be a bigger job size and not being remunerated to its full worth. So I just would like some peace of mind in that, and perhaps as part of that they could indicate what market sectors and job sizes they went through. Is that possible?
I can liaise with you post the meeting, Councillor.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Just a supplementary to that, given the statutory independence of the Independent Maori Statutory Board, if we were not to have an outside agency assess the proper level of remuneration for board members, how would council be able to reach a conclusion on what it was appropriate to pay them? Maybe that question to Phil Wilson.
Quite clearly, you may have answered your own question, Your Worship. I think that is correct. We do need to take care that we keep this objective, independent and so on, given the nature of the board.
I really think that's the important thing we've got to consider in the questions that we're asking. It's appropriate to delve in to different aspects of the report, but to note that this is a statutory obligation on us, and the board is independent of us, and therefore the council itself has to take particular care that it does not look like it's developing a funding agreement in a way other than that is objective and relying on independent objective advice. Next question, we've got a big build-up of questions now, so we'll try to get through them all. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Yeah, I'll wait to speak rather than question, sorry. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. My question was around this being a service level agreement and why it isn't something like a partnership agreement in line with the whole spirit of Te Tiriti, but I'm wondering if it's because it's to maintain that autonomy between the two.
Kia ora. Thank you. Through the chair. The service level agreement talks about the services that Auckland Council departments provide to the IMSB in terms of largely back office support type work, the human resources, for example. So it's an agreement which just sets out what services council will provide to the IMSB, and that saves the IMSB duplicating those services within their own secretariat. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah. I guess so, yeah.
The service level agreement's an adjunct to the funding agreement, and the funding agreement expresses something a little bit more in terms of the relationship.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just the terms supplier and customer just doesn't gel with, what we're trying to achieve here. But I understand it's just an instrument. Yeah. I have another question, if that's okay. What do we do in regards to you know, there's the same issue that keeps coming up in our meetings around consultation and engagement. You know, IMSB, rightly so, keep bringing up that we haven't done the proper consultation engagement with our mana whenua, with our Māori partners. So is there something in the agreement that holds us to account on that? Some kind of checks and balances? Because then they're just going to have to keep bringing it up. What is there to make the council do it genuinely?
Through your worship, well, I'd like to start my answer by expressing the commitment of the organisation to do that well. We obviously aspire to do it well. The IMSB has a statutory role to hold us to account in that regard and to audit us. The audit is the periodic audit is the key mechanism that they have for monitoring our performance and giving us feedback. We've been through one recently. So that's the primary mechanism they have alongside the advice of the Secretariat directly into our departments.
Oh, thank you. Lucky we have them then.
Thank you, Councillor. Next question, Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've just got 4 quick questions, and hopefully they're just a couple of word answers. First question, so the funding is a requirement of legislation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. This is slightly less than previous years, the figure that we're looking for in A.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. The amount has been independently assessed.
Through the chair, the amount was Council's finance team and IMSB discussed their budget requirements for the year, much as they would with any other council department, but as if the IMSB were any other council department in determining what their needs were for the coming year.
Okay, and whilst the figure is mentioned in A, should there be any direct savings, they would be, and they didn't match that figure, they didn't spend that amount of money, that money would come back to council as savings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes.
Thank you. So the only one I'll just ask again, the amount was agreed to by council, just the process around that, Your Worship. So the amount that's been agreed, I said, was it independently assessed? And I'm hearing that it was an agreement between the council staff and the IMSB to meet the legislative requirements. Would that be correct?
Yes, so the decision today is whether to accept the funding, the proposed funding agreement or not. The funding itself has not been independently assessed, but staff's advice is that this meets the reasonable costs of the Independent Māori Statutory Board.
And it's less than what's been previously given.
If I might, through the Mayor, in past years we have convened a subgroup of councillors to review this and to recommend it. I did not convene that this time exactly because there was no material change from the previous year, and in fact it was reduced slightly, thus accommodating inflationary pressures and such. So took the view that it didn't need reassessed by a subgroup of councillors leading into this process today.
I see, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Filipaina.
Tēnā koe koro matua, tēnā koe James. Can I just confirm that the proposed funding agreement and that the staff considered this and are satisfied that the level of total direct funding, which is in front of us, is appropriate and is in line with the parameters agreed in the 10-year budget? Can I confirm that?
Yes.
Also, a flow-on from Councillor Bartley's question around the service agreement. Can you confirm that with that and the SLA is that it is through that service level agreement saving money. It reduces the overall cost to the ratepayer.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, that is the intent of having the service level agreement, that it removes duplication in provision of support services.
And my last part, Your Worship, is can you also confirm that the mahi, the work that they do, this the Independent Māori Statutory Board do, is across Tāmaki Makaurau, it's across Auckland wide and not just centralised in a local board area, but it's across Tāmaki Makaurau, across Auckland?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Okay, kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Kia ora, and thank you, James, for your report. My question is a follow-on from an earlier question in relation to, I find it quite interesting really, accommodation. Now, if we have an independent organisation, and whilst I'm well and truly for saving funds, absolutely no doubt, I just question, how would an organisation be independent if they are located in the same building? Now, I just want to preface this with some work I did when I was doing my master's about psychology at work and behaviours, and so much, as we all know, is built on relationships and beliefs. And so I just wonder, would it be fair and reasonable to ask the Independent Māori Statutory Board to be located in the same building where they may come under pressure? And please, just a note on this, Your Worship, it's not that I don't agree with saving funds, I just would like an answer to the real logistics around the psychology of pressure from people as they have relationships, they get to see people more often, and then would that mean that we had independence? I'm not sure who is going to answer that. And I know that Independent Māori Statutory Board are well and truly capable of being independent, but there is such a thing as relationship building and pressures that can occur if you are seated near or next to someone or next room. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's about the perception of being independent, I think, is the key point you're making. James, have you got any comment on that? No, I think your point's well made, Councillor, that if the organisation is wanting to be seen as being independent and auditing us independently, being in the bowels of our organisation might create some perceptional difficulties. I think your comment's a fair one. Right, the last question is a further question from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So, without wanting to prejudice the independence of the IMSB, if I just look at the line items under the funding agreement, which include legal and planning, engagement and reporting to Māori and stakeholders, engage Māori expertise for council projects and plans, is there a facility for Auckland Council to provide these at an internal cost arrangement that might well be more economical and more efficient than the same cost being applied to some external party? So are some of these items actually met by council and subject to a charge, or are all of these costs external? And are there opportunities to make savings? Because I do know that council employs quite a number of people within our Māori department effectively. Thanks.
Thank you. Phil Wilson.
Through your worship. These are external costs, and it relates closely to the previous discussion about accommodation, that there is an independence it's implicit in their role that they provide an independent perspective into the organisation and are resourced accordingly. There's a lot of work that happens jointly in partnership, but of course that requires two parties to come to the table adequately resourced to do that work. So this is the resourcing independent of council of the board.
Thank you. We now come to comments. First request for a comment is Councillor John Watson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd just like to clarify at the minute that the line of questioning here, while apparently zeroing in on one aspect of what is a well-written and helpful report, is I hope it's not been taken as a undue or excessive examination of the salaries of the IMSB. The IMSB members take what's given to them, so it's not as if they're setting their own salary. So I just want to make that clear at the start. This is not directed at the individual members who do a good job and I'm sure who are very busy. But however, this is public money, and the word proportionality has been used here. And I think in terms of that public comparison, for instance, I mean I know that in the area where I have a little experience in teaching, for instance, a graduate teacher starts on a salary of $52,000 a year. An experienced teacher after 5 to 8 years is earning between 70 and 80k, which I can assure you are very demanding roles in terms of commitment and time. So in that entrance of proportionality, I think we're on a bound to compare that to what happens out in the public sector as well. As far as the issue of the salary comparisons to council go, that 70% component that has been identified here, I just really want to not so much highlight the council, the IMSB proportion of that, but the proportionality then of how these various salary bands come through, how they relate to local boards. And I say that because I was at a meeting earlier in the week where there was a move to increase what I regard as an already very significant salary from the floor, from members of the Auckland Council. So this isn't sort of just an isolated instance of zeroing in on the poor old IMSB. This does happen in other quarters as well. And when I look at the drive to try and attract people to roles in council, particularly local board, we complain about the poor voter turnout. We complain sometimes about the ability to attract a diversity of people. This sort of disproportionality, if I can put it that way, I don't think helps. And it's not just in this instance. I look at the proportionality between board chairs, for instance, who in a number of instances earn over $90,000 compared to that salary rate of board members sitting around that 45 level. So I think what this does today, for me anyway, is to highlight the disproportionality that exists between salaries in this organisation and the factors that are taken in consideration as they relate to the most numerous component of the governance structure, and that's local board members. So that's certainly my reason in highlighting this. And as far as the specifics of the role that have determined this outcome here, I certainly would appreciate that being maybe articulated in some detail, so we just don't have this kind of reference back to the independent review without any real substantiating data. So that's the point I wanted to make, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a valid one, both in terms of what happens with people working for a living out in the public, and also in this case with other members of the Auckland Council who are also part of this relativity, and who I think in the instances I've referred to are not proportionately reflected. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you. I had a question before, but I think it was answered in the fact that the Remuneration Authority don't set the IMSB rates, but they do set their travel expenses, etc. So it is hard to get relativity, and the reality is we've already been told by the chair of the Remuneration Committee we should be paid about 20% higher, but it's not publicly palatable. So, but what I wanted to say was to address the fee that the IMSB members get. In my experience over the last 9 years, when I look at the work that I've done with Glenn Wilcox from IMSB on hearings, and I'll talk about that in the next item, you know, hours and weeks of hearings, deliberations, all of that sort of work. IMSB members do quite different work from local board members, and I mean, I wouldn't say no to 50,000 a year for the level of work at local board, and I'm not downplaying what they do, but we're making regional decisions, and IMSB sit around the table with us and make those regional decisions. So the level of what they're having to undertake is different, but also they're on many of our subcommittees delegated to sign off submissions to the government, quite significant pieces of work. They're part of plan changes, all sorts of kind of quite intense and involved types of work they do. So, you know, and when it comes down to it, we don't set it. You know, it's set by strategic pay, and I'm the chair of 3 other organisations, and I use that company because it has actually shown that they take into account everything that's done, and you get a fair go at it. You know, you can see what's been done, and you can see what are the bands and what it's worth. And so I don't think you can do anything more than have an independent company check this out. But I, for one, in my experience, you know, there's a lot of work done by IMSB members, and it's just, you can't even compare it to what local boards do. It's more comparable to what we do. And even though they're not elected, they are accountable to their iwi constituents that have put them there. So they have all sorts of outside work just as we do. So I just wanted to support that. I think it's great that they've made a bit of a change here. It's not an increase. And I really do not understand this sort of, it feels like several people having a go. And I want to also support Councillor Mulholland's comments around maintaining independence. You can't do that if you sit in the office next door, especially when they hold quite an important audit function. So I do support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to take a brief call because I've had a chance to look up what the Local Government Act, Local Government Auckland Council Act, Schedule 2 says about this. Point 1, the Auckland Council must appoint an independent expert to inform it of appropriate fees for the council to pay members of the board. That's point 1. Point 4, the independent expert must inform the board and Auckland Council of the appropriate fee for the chairperson, deputy and other board members. Section 5, the Auckland Council must act in accordance with the information provided to it by the independent expert. So we've had a long debate here, but there is no discretion. It's set out in Schedule 2 of the Local Government Act. The strategic pay have gone through this exercise 10 times. I'm not sure, because I haven't been here through the 10 years of council, whether it's been questioned before, but they have been consistent in their view that that's the level at which the pay should be set. And the final comment I'd just like to make, and is to really back up Councillor Cooper's point, Glenn Wilcox, who just the first person that comes to mind on the board, works incredibly hard. Actually, the hours he puts in, he'd justify twice that salary. I think it is a fraught area when you talk about remuneration, because I get constant comments from the public, why are these councillors paid so much? And I'd say the same thing in defence of councillors. You know, I know of councillors that work every hour of the day and are responsive and accountable to their constituents. So I think we have to be really, really careful before we start pointing the finger on this one. I can't say from years in Parliament that every parliamentarian earned the salary they earned. Some of them probably deserved twice as much, and some of them probably deserved a fraction of what they got. That's the nature of being an elected office. This isn't an elected office, but it is set out very clearly in the Act what we must do, and we follow the Act, because the Act is binding on us and there is no discretion. So we come now to Councillor Angela Dalton for a comment, please.
Thank you. And it's along the same lines about the work that the IMSB do. You know, I'll be supporting these recommendations, of course, as seconder. But again, if I hark back to the Audit and Risk Committee and look at the treaty audit and the work that has gone on in there, and the accountability, which is the role of IMSB, that I hear as a governing body member around the table, the questions that we get and the challenges that we get from the members, Karen Wilson, Tohi Narai, the chair, David, and it's a great learning experience, that's for sure, but they are doing their job, and they're doing their job well, and it extends to outside of the meeting room. And just to confirm, I've just had an experience with Glenn Wilcox on the Freedom Camping bylaws, and that's a value add. And if we're going to talk about the value add being the mana whenua input in the Māori and the Te Ao Māori perspective, and I guess that's the uniqueness when we go to, if we're going to talk about how much people should be paid, the point of difference is that they are Māori. That is the point of difference. And they are in a minority as well. So in terms of being able to just get anybody to do that job, it is impossible to just get anybody to do that job outside of Māoridom. I also wanted to say something else and I've forgotten what it was, but I guess in summary, I'm supporting these recommendations. I think they're value add. We're lucky to have them to be able to keep us honest on our obligations to the Tiriti of Waitangi. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just briefly supporting these recommendations as well, and just sort of adding that it's not that they're a benefit, although they are hugely beneficial. It's also a moral and legal requirement upon us. And so, goodness me, I think that's probably not enough. I think they probably do a lot more work than what they get paid. And yeah, I thank them for that, and I think they do a great job for Auckland. That's it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to confirm, under Len Brown's mayoralty, I actually chaired the subcommittee that Phil Wilson referred to, and he can confirm that. I can confirm that there isn't the discretion in and around this area. So it was interesting being there from the get-go, but it is appropriate that there is scrutiny in terms of any public expenditure. But I would just say to those who are perhaps wanting to discharge their responsibilities and accountabilities today, that having chaired it in the past, there isn't a lot of discretion here. And I think that nobody is questioning the performance of the IMSB. It's just members who are wanting to make sure that we are undertaking our roles and responsibilities as councillors properly.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And in reply, Councillor Al Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Councillor Fletcher, I think it's appropriate that I close the debate after your comments. Why is because I was going to mention the fact that you chaired the committee way back in the day in regards to this. So I just acknowledge your work through this. Your Worship, I just wanted to sort of really acknowledge the negotiation team. And it was mentioned earlier around finance and performance, but the team and the Secretariat of the Independent Māori Statutory Board. As a result of the negotiation, we have a situation today where the ask is less than what was previously made. So I know and I acknowledge the Independent Māori Statutory Board in recognising the financial situation that we find ourselves. So I acknowledge them, but also again the finance and performance team and the negotiation team. So Your Worship, I'm not going to sort of take up that much time, but for those that have been around the table since 2010, I remember attending the pōwhiri in November of 2010 for the Independent Māori Statutory Board. And can I say as my last comment, Your Worship, that and governing body, can I say that we as a council are all the better for the Independent Māori Statutory Board, especially in regards to the accountability. That is their role, and with all the reports, the independent reports they have done, we are all the better for that in regards to the te tiriti o Waitangi. So to everybody concerned, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, and yes, definitely support the recommendation. Kia ora, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. So the recommendations are on the screen. I'll take the vote on the voices. I haven't had any request for a division. So if you're looking at recommendations A, B and C, all those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I think I can declare that carried and carried unanimously. Thank you very much for that.